Welcome to Career Coffee Chat Live. I'm your host, Erin Urban. I'm a certified executive coach, and I help people elevate their careers by unlocking those potentials, by removing the roadblocks so you, as the driven, emerging, and evolving leader, can achieve more impact, influence, and income. And I'm very excited today to talk to you about what matters when it comes to elevating your presence and your influence, particularly in competitive corporate environments. Today, we'll talk all about what matters when it comes to executive presence. And for those of you just tuning in, please say hi. Please say where you're from. I love to welcome you to the show. Very excited today to have Evelyn MacLean-Quick on our show today to talk about executive presence and her many years as a thriving executive presence in major Fortune 500 organizations. So if you've never seen my smiling face before, my name is Erin Urban, or CoachEUrban. You can find more about me at CoachEUrban.com. And of course, the Career Coffee Chat podcast is available on all major channels, including YouTube and Amazon. Who knew you could get a podcast on Amazon as well? But you can, and I'd love for you to check out the Career Coffee Chat podcast on those channels, on your favorite channel, and subscribe, get a thumbs up, or hop over to my YouTube channel and subscribe to that so you'll make sure you don't miss any of the replays for either the live show or the podcast. Without further ado, I'd love to welcome and you actually introduce Evelyn MacLean-Quick. Let me talk a little about Evelyn first and why, well, number one, I'm so stinking excited to have her on the show today. So she is a senior executive with over 30 years experience assisting public and privately held oil and gas companies grow their business worldwide through organic and M&A activity. Now, on a personal note, I've known Evelyn for quite a little while, and she is a thriving and dynamic force in the corporate executive environments. And right now, she's enjoying a luxurious lifestyle in Colorado, and I'm more than happy to welcome Evelyn to the show. And I believe, Evelyn, you also have a sidekick there, too. Is Bodie still around?
He sure is. Let's see. He's taking a respite right now, and he is, let me see, there he is.
There he is. Yeah, that's the famous sidekick.
He may come to my rescue on the odd occasion through the next hour. We shall see.
Well, Evelyn, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show, and thank you for tuning in from lovely Colorado and your home there. And I'm really excited to talk about what matters, what really makes an executive presence anyway, because we hear this term tossed around quite a bit. And it's good to understand, first of all, what is it and what matters, and what are your lessons learned throughout your competitive corporate career, what that looks like for you. And is anything you want to share with the audience? I know that we're super excited to have you on the show. Good morning, Kanisha. Great to see you this morning. So if any of you have any questions as Evelyn is sharing her insights throughout her corporate career as an executive, please feel free to pop them in the comments and we'll be sure to answer them. So Evelyn, when you talk about, when we hear the term executive presence, what comes to mind?
Sure. Well, thanks again, Erin, for the opportunity to be with you and all your guests today. My career, I started out in the fabrication and construction area of the industry, none too glamorous. Jeans, hard hat, boots, warm clothes in winter. And then, from there, I progressed through the ranks after spending about 20 years of my career in the United Kingdom, taking me to many countries. I then transferred over to the United States 20 years ago, became a expatriate for a period here in Houston. Thank you to Halliburton Company. So my journey has been one that included the School of Hard Knocks, because there was a lot of challenges along the way, being, a woman very much in the minority population. And something I was acutely aware of from my very, very early days of my career was to observe the behavior in other people. And where I saw behavior that I thought was effective I would store that and store it away so that maybe I could put that into practice one day. And so on my journey, the types of things that really worked for me, Erin and audience, is that people need to feel motivated and inspired when in our company. And, speaking from my own experience, working for or being in the environment with other executives whom I found to be quite dull and quite, lackluster, I felt it took some of my energy away. And so, from my point of view, it's really important to know your audience. And as part of knowing your audience, show up in an authentic way to that audience. In my case, I think I got some gifts that I've been able to put to good use. I never meet a stranger. So I tend to have been quite effective at putting my audience at ease. So being approachable, being humble, being human, being empathic, it's a word you hear a lot these days, are key traits of executive presence. A few other things I would say. I've always dressed for myself, and I've always been a bit of a fashionista, but I've also always been hyper sensitive to the environment in which I was working. And so I would dress for my day, dress for my audience, and I always kept it classy, kept it professional, because what we say, what we don't say, and how we look are all cues that people draw conclusions from. And so as we are working our way through the executive towards the executive labyrinth, that's really, really important, how we show up. I think other things that have been really important, Erin, are that I developed self-awareness through my vulnerability, through my insecurity. I didn't embark on the view that other people had the problem. I focused on what was within my control, and what was within my control was building my own brand, building my own self-confidence, seeking feedback. Some of the greatest gifts are the honest and frank feedback that's not sugar-coated, because then you have, a chance to do something, with it. One final comment, and I'll pause, and I would say I chose never to mix business with pleasure. And as a woman, early in my career, how else were you going to meet even prospective partners than often in the workplace? And I saw too many careers derailed, Erin, where girls, chose to get involved emotionally with partners, and I saw that sabotage career. So I made deliberate choices, and that was one. Another choice that I've made, and I think it's even more relevant today, is beware of the trap of social media, because nothing, whatever you put out there, is available and never erased. And so, be mindful that what you put out there might have been with the best of intentions. However, it's subject to interpretation, and it can be sabotaged. And so, if you're building executive presence in your early stages of your career, just be mindful that, it could come back to something could come back to haunt you, in future. But let me pause there. You may want to delve deeper into some of these.
I do. Because you just shared some major golden nuggets here. And thank you so much for doing that. And one of those I want to latch on to, there's more than one, but one of them I want to latch on to particularly is the presence part of it, and then showing up authentically in that space. Because I will share with you that a lot of emerging leaders don't feel comfortable being themselves, and for a variety of reasons. Maybe they feel like, well, if somebody really knew who I was as an individual, they wouldn't. That's not executive presence. They feel like they have to become someone they're not to have that executive presence. Now, when you hear that, Evelyn, what is your counter argument about, okay, not putting on the mask,
Yeah.
right? What is that? Because we both know that that's not the productive way to
Right.
present it. And executive presence is not about becoming someone you're not. That's
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Erin. I think it's a great concern, if you will. So first of all, I would always say, know your why.
Mm.
Why have you chosen an executive track? I would suggest, if it's all about you, reconsider. Because if you make it all about you, there'll come a time when your lack of authenticity will be validated. And so I would also say that if you don't fit in a particular environment, we have a choice. And it may not be worth the compromise you're making to your own ethics to try and fit in. So, and I would say, when I look back, I probably compromised some of my own values. And that might have been where I was too meek to take a stand for myself, and I allowed someone to bully me. We don't have to do that anymore. So there's something about taking a stand for what we stand for. And so you've got to be true to yourself, because you will regret it later in life. And I think one of the troubling things today in the professional world is that there's a lot that's attached, a lot of credence attached to reaching the executive ranks. I'm not so sure that that is all it's cracked up to be, if it causes people unhappiness or challenges in other areas. And so being true to self, I don't think there's a substitute for. Using our courage muscle to call it out, I think, is important. I think more and more organizations are embracing a speak up culture, much more so than I would say they did in my time. And so, I just reinforce the importance and impact of knowing your why. And because some people are not cut out for it, Erin. And if you're not cut out for it, why put yourself through the pain and the suffering of just, not getting to that level that you so desire. And so seeking feedback and promoting that the world now needs diversity. It needs to be inclusive of other people's views and opinions. And so I think, equipped with the knowledge of your own strengths and weaker areas, equipped with a commitment to your why, and being prepared to speak up. And if you're not in the right environment today, find one that you would fit into. And I always encourage people that when you go for an interview, it's as important in today's world for you to do some interviewing, so that you feel comfortable that might be the right environment, for you. So just a few thoughts there, Erin.
Great. That's wonderful. David actually has a question. In a comment, he says, I agree that awareness is extremely important. And he also mentions it's difficult to ask people for frank and honest feedback. And you're right, David, but there's a way we can do that. And do you have any tips, strategies to help people ask for constructive criticism, Evelyn?
So I think in the world that we live in today, there's a lot of people that are sometimes nervous to speak truth. And even as supervisors, sometimes I've been in the position where, you're not sure if there's a motive behind the question that someone has raised seeking feedback, because it might be that they have something sinister in mind, such as using it to fuel, a discrimination case or whatever. And so it is critically important to have your evidence if you are embarking on providing feedback to individuals. But as David is asking, he's asking, what are the tips and strategies for seeking feedback? So number one, David, I would say, is to put it out there that you as an individual is personally committed to receiving feedback to assist with your development journey. Mm-hmm. Be genuine and authentic when you are extending that request. Express that you've been on this journey to deeper insights on your effectiveness, and you value other people's feedback equally, if not greater, than what you see when you hold your own mirror up. And so it's about being humble. It's about being, genuinely in pursuit of feedback that you truly will value, that you truly will take on board. Sometimes it pays to offer a compliment to the person that you are seeking the feedback from. I am on occasion, I remember there was buzzwords for a while that people were using, like, I invite you to consider. And I remember noticing this in action. And I went to the individual afterwards, and his name was Miguel. And I said, Miguel, I really appreciated how you used this language of I invite you. I said, I think I might be adding that to my toolbox. Mm-hmm. And so I said, might you have any other feedback you'd care to share with me? Because the more, David, you exhibit that you're pursuing feedback because you genuinely value it from that individual in that moment, I can assure you it's then an honor by that from that, that individual would view it as an honor to help you with feedback that aids your journey.
That's right. That's great insights. Because I also mentioned it in my book, Elevate Your Career is all about understanding how to elevate your presence so you can then get more impact and income. And a part of that journey, it's crucial for that journey, is getting feedback. And what's interesting is when we get feedback willy-nilly and we don't ask for it, oftentimes we're like, I'm affronted. How dare you? How dare you shake my sense of self?
Absolutely.
Oftentimes that feedback we get is counter to what we believe or the person we have established in our own minds. And but on the flip side, when we elicit feedback, when we ask for feedback, we're much more open to receiving that feedback. And it allows us to basically make that a part of our brand. All right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then what's interesting is that when you start doing that, people start coming to you for feedback for them. Because you made it okay. You made it a safe place, right?
Absolutely. And then you become a quasi coach, and I think executives, some of the best executives are those who can perform effective coaching. And it reminds me, Erin, of a course I did last year, because I think the leadership mantra is changing. Mm-hmm. Back in my day, the leaders, the executives who made it were those with the command and control style, do as I tell, if you will. Right. Who wants to work for someone like that in today's world? And so I went on a course at MIT last year, and there's a gentleman, I probably not do justice to his name, but it's Hal Gregerson. And he talks about questions are the answer. And his theme is productive inquiry. And so what I've been doing more and more in my recent years as an executive is it's okay not knowing. It's okay not to have the answers. And practice.
Oh my gosh, really?
Totally right. And so practice productive inquiry. So if an executive can provide psychological safety to those around him or her, and that is provided in a way that's non-threatening. And then if you practice productive inquiry with a curious mind, you're inviting engagement and participation. You're inviting people to engage with you and part with their ideas to shape the journey, to shape the problem solving. Because productive inquiry will lead to insights. I have been forever in awe of what I've learned from other people. And so inquiry will lead to insights. Insights lead to impact. And in a world today where we have to value diverse perspectives more and more, in praise of the incomplete leader, the executives that people will want to work for in future are those who practice productive inquiry, those who provide psychological safety, those who are humble and don't pretend to know everything. These are the executives that the world needs to create many more of. And any budding executives listening today, think about what I've just said, practicing inquiry, because it will lead to your insights and theirs and everyone else's, which will in turn lead to impact. And the leaders who can practice being more inclusive without feeling threatened because there's someone smarter than they, that is what, these are the types of leadership traits that will win the day. And that will be what will draw, draw recruiters and headhunters and company boards to want and need for success. So.
Absolutely correct. Gone are the days of the do as I say, not as I do leader. That macho, and don't mean any negative connotation to that, but it was very much of a male patriarchic macho, I have to present this thing. And that is passing. Thank goodness.
Absolutely.
But there's still this thought for many emerging and evolving leaders, professionals, people who are emerging into leadership, that they have to have all the answers. And so what you just gave, Evelyn, is permission not to have all the answers, because as I've coached my clients to tell them, are you okay with letting go and being the expert? When you want to move into leadership, it's not about being the expert.
Yeah, it's a bit like being the conductor of the orchestra. It's a bit like being, the GPS that doesn't really tell you everything. And so this notion of the leader being a host is emerging. The leader as a facilitator is emerging. So in order to succeed as one of these hosts, facilitators, conductors of the orchestra, you got to get quite comfortable in your own skin. You got to kind of know what you project, so it comes back to presence, because there's presence where people can appear stiff and unapproachable and rigid. I'm not so sure that would aid success in being selected. So, the presence thing is about being approachable, being open, being warm, being human, because we've all seen the other side to that, have we not?
Absolutely. And I share with my clients who are looking to further their evolution in the leadership into the executive ranks and or emerge into leadership. One is are you okay with letting go of being the expert? And the other one is, it's not so much about being the expert and having all the answers, because leadership is more about people. It's a people skill, not just a strategy skill. So it's a shift in perspective. And a part of that strategy is allowing those underneath you and growing those leaders underneath you to help you build the strategy. It's not all about, hey, look at me. Aren't I great? Right.
Yeah. It's we before me. And, there's a lot of me people out there, a lot of me and I. So notice language. So yeah, me before, it's we before me. And I used to write that down and have it on little stickies around me, because, yeah, it's important. It's really important.
It is really important. Sandra just mentioned, she says, bingo, feedback is a gift of time and energy. It's a gift to oneself. Amen. Receiving feedback is a challenge, though, particularly since it may challenge our sense of self, and it's not a skill that's normally taught. Feedback is a gift, she says again. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think sometimes there's feedback that stings. And some of that is because we have an inner narrative, an inner movie that plays. And, that inner movie, perhaps, is where we keep telling ourselves, failure is bad, and, negative feedback means I'm terrible and my world is about to come crashing down. And so, just be mindful of our biases and about that inner theater. But we're all human and we all have ghosts. I sometimes talk about ghosts in the boardroom, and that's where the ego, where the ego can sometimes find it really hard to process, some constructive feedback. But I think rejecting feedback is risky business, because if that is someone else's reality, try and find a gift in that sting that it might have felt like at that time.
Right, absolutely. This is such valuable advice. Now, Evelyn, you mentioned that you were not necessarily a traditional executive, that you kind of bucked the norm. So, can you share with us a little bit about that journey and some lessons you learned along the way? Because I know there's a lot of emerging and evolving leaders that don't necessarily want to follow that traditional pathway, and they might not consider themselves a little out of the normal corporate accepted ambiance or presence. What would you say to those individuals?
Yeah, so I've had some comments that I could share here today, and others I best not. But one comment I always remember being given was that if they broke the mold with you. And I used to explore that. What do you mean they broke the mold? I always dressed for myself. And I've always had a flair for fashion and style. And I used to look around me and I'd see all these people. And back in my day, you wore a suit a lot of times, even women, we wore suits, and they were dark in color most of the time. And so I always had this flair for fashion and style. And so I did not let anybody ever take that away from me during my career. I will always dress appropriate, but if I feel like having a red day like today, well, then you'll get red and you'll get the sweater, the lipstick and the glasses to match. But there's something about being yourself. And I am quite creative, and I am also quite creative when it comes to solutions. I've also got a lot of energy. I've always, had plenty of energy. I remember 20 odd years ago, Erin, I was leading I was part of a team actually after a merger, and I was asked to lead culture and communication, which was really a creative construct at the time, because a lot of these mergers don't even do that today. But I was in charge of leading culture and communication. And I had to go out and interview the workforce, and I had to then take it back and share it with the executives. And I've never drank tea or coffee. I've never drank tea or coffee in my entire life. It's not a health-related thing. It's a taste-related thing. And so I drink water. And back then, I used to always have a bottle of Volvic water with me, and I would take this bottle everywhere. So after collecting all this feedback back in the day, there was a summary comment that I came up with that summed up all this feedback. So I go to the executives, and I'm like a 20-something-year-old, maybe 28 or so, and I'm stood before this audience of the 50-something-year-olds. And I stood there and I said, well, gentlemen, because it was all gentlemen, there was no lady on the team, on that executive team. I said, the best way to sum up what your organization thinks about you is that you have no oomph. That your workforce view that you lack oomph. And oomph is something they want to see more of. So this Irish executive, he said to me, Evelyn, does oomph come in a bottle? Because you seem to have plenty oomph. He was thinking that he could be prescribed maybe a transfusion of oomph, and that maybe I was a manufacturer of oomph. I'm telling this story for a reason. I'm telling this story because I cultivated an environment where I got to know people well, didn't ever meet a stranger, and there was humility and personality and fun along the way. And I cultivated that. I was never, I guess when I had to be poker faced, I would absolutely be poker faced. But there was also a way of just being yourself. And so keeping it clean, keeping it professional, letting the fun side of your personality show, whether that be in how you showed up physically on the day with your color schemes, but always keep it professional. And so I commend the industry for allowing me bring myself to the workplace, because I wouldn't have stuck it had I not been able to take my creative outfits and style to work every day, because I would have been so suppressed that I would have been miserable. And so I say to anybody listening today, just be yourself. It's part of your brand. And I'm sure on occasions I stood out because I wasn't wearing the dark blue or the black, or if I was wearing a white shirt, my one had some frills or a different cuff, but it was all part of me. I wasn't being someone else. I was being me. So those of you listening, please just be you. And most people will one day celebrate that you were just you and not you being the person that maybe you weren't meant to be. Because if you can't be you, go find where you can be you. That's very good. Well worth it.
That's very good advice. And I share with people, once you establish a brand and you establish the presence you want to have, and you're in an organization that you enjoy, know that it's very challenging to then go changing that presence if, it's not authentically you. So they need to get to know a different you. However, I will also share that I did do that, but for the better. Because I received negative feedback. It was the best thing that ever happened to me, although I did not see that at the time. At the time, I was like, for at least a month until I did have someone step in. My mentor believed in me, and actually the CEO, because it was a smaller organization, I think everybody knew Aaron was unhappy. And he said, he handed me my very first personal improvement book, and my mentor stepped in because he saw some potential in me, and I did make a change. And then 9 months later, people were asking me, who is this person? And speaking of, oh, look at the face, oh, Bodie. See, that's an example of being more personable and real. Now, how many executives do you think would be interviewed and then share their personal VA who just happens to be a boxer? Not many. So if you don't feel comfortable being yourself now, I'm not sure when you'll feel comfortable being yourself. So please do. So Evelyn, we have a little bit more time, and I'd love to hear from you some of your, I guess, most important lessons learned that you'd like to share with those tuning in either now or later. And of course, for anybody that's tuning in now, please feel free to ask any questions you have in the comments. If you have a captive audience, you have a captive ear now, so please take advantage of that. So Evelyn, any top lessons learned you'd like to share?
Yeah, there's a couple of things coming to mind. So I was in a restaurant one time, and I was offered a piece of feedback after the individual who was dining alone asked if he could join my table. Me and a girlfriend went out for dinner in Aberdeen. And this individual, I remember some of the takeaways that he offered me. And they are with me today. 30 years later. So one of them was, know your subject and the words will follow. And he was not referring to the subject as in, some theory or some formula. He was referring to subject in the context of the individual, about the human. Because some individuals are type A, some individuals are therefore talkers, some individuals are listeners. So there's something about scanning your audience and modifying your presence to suit the environment. Because if you are in the company of the CEO, for instance, or the COO, just know your place. And that might be an environment where you're listening more and talking less. So I thought that know your subject and the words will follow is a good, easy tip to remember. Growing up, my assertiveness was often misunderstood for my ambition. If I committed to something, I followed through. And that would be another very basic tip to the audience we have here today. If you commit, don't let anybody down by failing to deliver on that commitment. You will build a reputation for someone who is reliable if you follow through on your commitments. Also, don't be afraid to volunteer, even if you don't have the answers. Many times I had no idea how I was going to solve a problem, but I was committed to being on the team that would help figure it out. So sometimes I think women, we are our own worst critics. And because we can be our worst critics, we look for it all to be perfect, and we sometimes undervalue just how much will come to us in the environment. Over the years, this might surprise a few people, but I sometimes had a harder time with other women than I did with men. Sometimes other women were bitchier because they felt that I was getting a share of success that wasn't for them. So don't be a bitch. I was never a bitch. And, don't be a bitch. Another important lesson, whether you're a supply chain person on this call today, an HR, an engineer, learn the business. Get to know the business. Get to know what drives the business. Be curious about the business. Don't just stay in your lane of knowledge, because one day it might just serve you very well to speak powerfully, to demonstrate your understanding of the business. Remember that when you speak, you are judged. But also remember that when you speak, you are judged and you are heard based on the filters that other people have either self-imposed or that have, they're there as they imagine them to be. I think in the world today, there's easier aspects to it, but there's also harder aspects to it. It's undoubtedly competitive, and it's easy to feel beat up. I would say today, don't be afraid to show your vulnerability. I had to get in my car and hide when I had to deal with my vulnerability. I remember it well in Aberdeen, sitting in a car on a cold October or February day, crying my eyes out because I was feeling like they had beaten me down to a pulp. I shouldn't have had to do that, and neither should anyone today have to run and hide when they're having a moment of vulnerability. I think as well, key is getting to know yourself and validating your impression of yourself and how you show up with others. And whether that's through a coaching relationship or just a peer-to-peer relationship, capitalize on these opportunities. I said some things earlier today, like we before me, know your subject, the words will follow, and so on and so on. So, that is all nested in your own level of self-awareness, and let it grow with every breath that you take. I think the other thing, Erin, I was judged on how hard I worked. I don't have children today, largely because I was scared to take on that part of my life and let it coexist with a career. I can't turn the clock back. And so be clear on what we want from our careers, but don't let the price be so high that you may live to regret decisions later. So self-care is important. It's not about being judged for how many hours you put in. Let's be judged on the output, and let's be judged on the how we achieve the output. In the interest of time, Erin, I see a question about how did I obtain my first board position. Would you like me to answer that?
Absolutely, if you don't mind. Yes, we have just enough time to answer that. Thank you, Jeff.
So I'm licking my wounds a little, Jeff, this week, because I recently made it to the candidate list of 25 for a public board position. I was one of 22 interviewed. I prepared like crazy for that interview. I reached out to executives and asked if they would kindly serve as a reference. All of them said yes. So obviously I had done a few things right by them in my time. I also reached out to people that knew the space, seeking their insights to validate their insights with my insights. So I got interviewed among the 22, and I made it to the next 14. I was interviewed then twice at the final 14 stage, and I made it to the final 7. The final 7 were for 5 board seats, and sadly, I was not chosen as one of the final 5 on this occasion. It was a particularly challenging process because it was one following a Chapter 11 by the company, and there were banks and bondholders involved in the process. So I've learned a few things about this process, and many things I wouldn't change. But key is for me not to feel beat up by the fact that I didn't make the final 5, but to celebrate the fact I was in the hunt to begin with, and for making it through the various stages. So the first board position that I actually secured, Jeff, was a not-for-profit board. And that not-for-profit board opportunity came through a joint interest. And that is because I care for animals. As you saw, my EA these days is a 4-year-old boxer. And so my joint interest led to a dialogue with an industry executive who was serving as the chair on the board, which is the Citizens for Animal Protection. And, I think the reason I got onto that board was that the chairman, being a business executive, he and I could talk common language. I'm in touch with business. And whether you're on a not-for-profit or a for-profit board, the role, the duty is much the same. It's fiduciary. You are serving others. There's a governance element, etc., etc. I'm also excited to share that I'm now I'm being put forward for another public board. I was on the HES public board until I took my retirement from HES at the end of the year. But how to get on boards as a woman or as a man with all these experiences will likely come through the network that we have built and the credibility that we have secured through our working history. And it takes us all the way back to where we started today, where we're building our brand, building our reputation as a credible professional, and someone that has the level of executive presence to represent investors, stakeholders, and the like on a board. So it matters a great deal, Jeff. What I did 20 years ago in my career will have shaped what I'm now doing 40 years later in my career. And, keeping it clean, keeping it professional will ultimately be on our side, here into the future. So I hope that was somewhat helpful, and happy to be contacted offline if anyone should wish to further the discussion that we've had today.
That's a generous offer. Thank you so much, Evelyn. It's been a true pleasure having you on the Career Coffee Chat show and sharing your lessons learned and what executive presence is. And it's also a pleasure to have Bodie on the
executive presence.
Yeah, he's got his executive presence nailed in a very relaxed style, I will have to say. I enjoy that more personable approach. So again, it's a true pleasure. Thank you all for tuning in to the Career Coffee Chat show live. And of course, please do check out the podcast. The replay will be available as well on the Career Coffee Chat LinkedIn company page. So feel free to check that out, as well as past episodes. And Evelyn has been very generous in offering to reach out and connect to anyone that wants to learn more about what it takes to elevate your presence. Evelyn, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for all tuning in. Until next time, keep elevating, my friends.